"You're under arrest for resisting a police officer," Officer Brent Daniels said, snapping the cold handcuffs onto Jamal Washington's wrists. Jamal's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. He didn't resist, even as Officer Daniels roughly pulled him toward the squad car. A small crowd had gathered outside the bustling downtown cafe where it had all started. Some recorded with their phones, whispering in disbelief. Jamal, a well-dressed man in his early 30s, was a respected defense attorney. But to Officer Daniels, all that mattered was the color of his skin. The cop hadn't bothered to ask for identification before jumping to conclusions. "Why am I being arrested?" Jamal asked, his voice steady. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Daniels snapped. "You match the description of a suspect in a robbery nearby." Jamal tried to keep his composure. "If you check my wallet, you'll find my ID and business card. I'm an attorney, and I was here meeting a client." Daniels ignored him, shoving him into the back seat of the car. "Tell it to the judge," he said, slamming the door shut. The crowd murmured louder now. Some people tried to intervene, but Daniels waved them off. "Move along, folks," he barked. "Nothing to see here." But there was plenty to see, and plenty to record. As the squad car sped away, Jamal sat in silence, his mind racing. He knew his rights better than anyone. He also knew this arrest was illegal. He'd done nothing wrong. Yet here he was, humiliated in public, handcuffed in the back of a police car. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jamal Washington was about to teach Officer Daniels a legal lesson he would never forget. Earlier that day, Jamal adjusted his tie as he stepped out of his sleek black sedan. It was a typical Friday afternoon, and he had just arrived at the Java Junction Cafe for a meeting with a new client. The cafe was bustling, filled with the hum of conversations and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. As he entered, the barista greeted him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Washington. Your usual?" "Not today, thank you. I'm here for a meeting," Jamal replied, glancing around the room. He spotted his client, a nervous-looking young man in his early 20s, sitting at a corner table. "Mr. Jamal Washington?" the man asked, standing as Jamal approached. "That's me," Jamal said, extending a hand. "You must be Carlos." Carlos nodded, shaking Jamal's hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for meeting me. I really need your help." Jamal sat down, pulling out his notebook. "Tell me everything." Carlos launched into his story, explaining how he had been wrongfully accused of shoplifting at a local electronics store. The store manager had refused to look at security footage, and now Carlos was facing charges. Jamal listened carefully, taking notes. "Don't worry," he said reassuringly. "We'll get this sorted out. I'll subpoena the footage and prove your innocence." Carlos looked relieved. "Thank you, Mr. Washington. I've been so stressed about this." Jamal gave him a confident smile. "That's what I'm here for." They wrapped up their meeting, and Carlos left, looking more hopeful than when he'd arrived. Jamal lingered for a moment, checking his phone and preparing for his next appointment. He was just about to leave when he noticed a police car pull up outside. 2 officers got out, scanning the cafe. Jamal paid them little mind, assuming they were just grabbing coffee. But then one of them, Officer Daniels, locked eyes with Jamal. Daniels nudged his partner and muttered something. They both started toward the cafe, their eyes fixed on Jamal. Jamal frowned, confused. He hadn't done anything wrong. "Sir," Daniels said as he approached, his tone already hostile. "We need to talk." Jamal stood up, his hands in plain sight. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You match the description of a suspect in a robbery that happened nearby," Daniels said, his hand resting on his holster. "We're going to need to see some ID." Jamal's heart sank. He knew where this was going. "Of course," he said calmly, reaching for his wallet. He moved slowly, not wanting to give them any excuse to escalate the situation. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it to Daniels. Daniels glanced at it, then back at Jamal. His expression didn't change. "Step outside," Daniels ordered. Jamal sighed. "Officer, I'm an attorney. I'm not involved in any robbery. I've been here for the past hour meeting with a client. You can check the cafe's security cameras if you don't believe me." Daniels ignored him. "Step outside now." Jamal knew his rights, but he also knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. He decided to comply for now. He stepped outside, the cafe patrons watching nervously. "Hands on the car," Daniels said. Jamal hesitated. "Officer, this is unnecessary. I haven't done anything wrong." "Do it," Daniels snapped. Reluctantly, Jamal placed his hands on the hood of his car. Daniels patted him down, then turned to his partner. "Cuff him," Daniels said. "What?" Jamal exclaimed, spinning around. "This is absurd. I haven't done anything wrong." Daniels grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're resisting," he growled. Jamal winced at the pain. "I'm not resisting. This is illegal." But Daniels wasn't listening. He snapped the cuffs onto Jamal's wrists and began reciting the Miranda rights. The cafe patrons gasped, some pulling out their phones to record. "Hey, what are you doing?" "He didn't do anything," one man shouted. "This is police brutality," another woman cried. But Daniels ignored them all, shoving Jamal toward the squad car. Back in the present, Jamal sat silently in the back of the police car, his mind racing. He knew exactly what his next move would be. This wasn't over. And by the time he was done, Officer Daniels would regret ever laying a hand on him. The police station was cold and unwelcoming. Jamal sat quietly in the holding cell, still in his suit, his hands resting on his lap. The murmur of officers going about their duties echoed through the halls. Outside the cell, Officer Daniels leaned against the desk, casually chatting with another officer, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Got ourselves a big-shot lawyer today," Daniels said, loud enough for Jamal to hear. "Thinks he's above the law." Jamal remained calm, though inside he was seething. He knew better than to react emotionally. He had spent years mastering the art of control in courtrooms filled with tension. This wasn't new territory, even if the stakes were personal. An officer approached Daniels, handing him a clipboard. "The captain wants to know why you brought him in," the officer said. Daniels shrugged. "Suspicious activity. Matched the description of a robbery suspect." The officer glanced over at Jamal, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "You sure about that? He doesn't seem like." Daniels cut him off. "Trust me. I know what I'm doing." Jamal finally spoke, his voice steady and calm. "Officer, if you're done playing games, I'd like my phone call." Daniels smirked. "Who are you going to call?" "Your lawyer." Jamal met his eyes without flinching. "No, the district attorney's office." Daniels' smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Nice try. You're not going anywhere until we sort this out." Jamal leaned back against the wall, his expression unreadable. "Suit yourself. Just know that every second you keep me here unlawfully is going to cost your department." Daniels snorted but said nothing. Earlier that day, Jamal's day had started off like any other. After his morning workout, he reviewed his schedule over breakfast. His first meeting was with Carlos, followed by a few court filings, and then an evening dinner with his wife, Nicole. Everything had gone according to plan until Officer Daniels decided to intervene. Jamal couldn't help but reflect on the irony. He had spent his entire career defending people against wrongful arrests and systemic bias, only to find himself on the receiving end of it. His mind wandered back to the cafe. The look in Daniels' eyes wasn't just about suspicion. It was about power. Daniels hadn't cared about who Jamal was or what he had to say. He had made up his mind the moment he saw him. Jamal had seen it before, in court, in the news, even in his own neighborhood. But experiencing it firsthand was different. Back in the station, the minutes dragged on. Finally, another officer approached the holding cell. He was older, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a captain's badge on his chest. "Mr. Washington," he said, unlocking the cell. "Let's have a word." Jamal stood, smoothing his suit jacket. About time. The captain led Jamal into a small interrogation room. He sat down across from him, folding his hands on the table. "I'm Captain Reynolds," he said. "I've been briefed on the situation, and I've seen your ID. Care to explain what happened?" Jamal raised an eyebrow. "I believe your officer should be the one explaining that. I was sitting in a cafe, minding my business, when Officer Daniels accused me of robbery and arrested me without cause." Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. "I see. And you're saying you had no involvement in the robbery?" Jamal gave him a sharp look. "Captain, I've been a licensed attorney for over a decade. I was meeting with a client at the time of the alleged robbery. There are multiple witnesses and security cameras that can confirm my whereabouts. This arrest is baseless, and you know it." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I'll look into it. In the meantime..." Before he could finish, the door burst open and Officer Daniels stormed in, his face red with anger. "Captain, we have procedures to follow. You can't just take his word for it." Reynolds shot him a warning glare. "Daniels, stand down." Daniels didn't budge. "With all due respect, sir, we can't let him intimidate us." He's playing the system. Jamal remained silent, watching the exchange with measured calm. Reynolds stood, towering over Daniels. I said, stand down. Now, reluctantly, Daniels stepped back, but the tension in the room was palpable. Reynolds turned back to Jamal. You'll be released shortly, pending verification of your alibi. I apologize for the inconvenience. Daniels opened his mouth to protest, but Reynolds silenced him with a look. Don't make this worse, Reynolds warned. Jamal stood, gathering his composure. Thank you, Captain. But this isn't over. I'll be filing a formal complaint against Officer Daniels. And trust me, I know exactly how to handle this. Reynolds nodded. Understood. You're free to go. As Jamal stepped out of the station, the cool evening air hit his face. He felt a mixture of relief and determination. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had been wrongfully arrested, every injustice that had gone unchecked. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Nicole, he said when his wife answered. I need you to meet me at the office. We have some work to do. Nicole didn't hesitate. On my way. Jamal's resolve hardened. He wasn't going to let this slide. Officer Daniels needed to learn a lesson, and Jamal was more than prepared to teach it. Later that night, Jamal sat in his office, the glow of his desk lamp illuminating stacks of legal documents. Nicole, his wife, sat across from him, her expression a mix of worry and determination. She had been by his side through countless challenges, but this time, it was personal. They humiliated you, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. In front of everyone, Jamal nodded, his fingers steepled under his chin. And they'll do it again if no one holds them accountable. Nicole leaned forward. So what's the plan? Jamal tapped on his laptop, pulling up a series of emails and case files. I'm filing a civil rights lawsuit against the department, specifically targeting Officer Daniels. But that's not all. He opened a folder labeled Complaint Evidence and began sorting through the files. There were witness statements, security footage from the cafe, and even footage from the body cams of other officers at the scene. I've already sent letters to the Civilian Oversight Board and the state's Attorney General, Jamal continued. But I want to take this a step further. Daniels isn't just a bad cop. He's a symptom of a broken system. Nicole's eyes narrowed. You're aiming for systemic change. Exactly, Jamal said. This lawsuit isn't just about my case. It's about every person who's been wrongfully targeted because of their race. Nicole nodded, her resolve firming. What do you need from me? Your expertise, Jamal said with a small smile. Nicole was a brilliant public relations strategist. I need this story to go public. The more attention we bring to this case, the harder it'll be for them to sweep it under the rug. Nicole smiled back. Consider it done. Meanwhile, at the station, Officer Daniels paced the dimly lit break room, his jaw clenched. His partner, Officer Harris, sat at a nearby table, scrolling through his phone. I can't believe Reynolds let him go, Daniels muttered. That guy was playing us. Harris glanced up, raising an eyebrow. You sure about that? He didn't seem like the robbery type. Daniels shot him a glare. You don't know these people like I do. They think they can do whatever they want and get away with it. Harris shrugged. Whatever, man. Just be careful. If Washington's really a lawyer, he could make this a big deal. Daniels scoffed. Let him try. No one's going to take his word over mine. But deep down, Daniels wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. He knew the department was already under scrutiny for past incidents. Another scandal could mean serious consequences, not just for him, but for everyone involved. The next morning, Jamal and Nicole sat in their living room, sipping coffee as they watched the morning news. Breaking news, the anchor announced. Local attorney Jamal Washington has filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city's police department, alleging wrongful arrest and racial profiling. The screen cut to footage from the cafe, showing Jamal being handcuffed and led away by Officer Daniels. The anchor continued. Washington, a prominent defense attorney, claims he was unlawfully detained despite providing identification and a valid alibi. Nicole smirked. That didn't take long. Jamal nodded, setting his mug down. The public deserves to know what's happening in their community. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from a local journalist. We'd like to interview you about your case. Are you available this afternoon? Jamal typed a quick reply. Let's do it. Back at the station, Captain Reynolds stormed into the briefing room, his face grim. Daniels and several other officers were already seated. Listen up, Reynolds barked. We're in hot water. Washington's lawsuit is making headlines, and the mayor's office is breathing down my neck. He shot a pointed look at Daniels. This is serious. If anyone has skeletons in their closet, now's the time to come clean. Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. Reynolds continued, Internal Affairs is launching an investigation. I want full cooperation from everyone. As the officers dispersed, Daniels pulled Harris aside. You think this'll blow over? Harris shrugged. Depends on what they find. You better hope your body cam footage doesn't make things worse. Daniels cursed under his breath. Later that day, Jamal arrived at the local news station for his interview. The producer greeted him warmly and led him to the studio. As he adjusted his microphone, the anchor, Lisa Turner, sat down across from him. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Washington, Lisa said. Your case has sparked a lot of conversation about police practices in our city. Jamal nodded. Thank you for having me. This isn't just about me. It's about holding the system accountable. The interview began, and Jamal recounted the events of his wrongful arrest. He spoke about the importance of addressing racial bias in policing and the need for systemic reform. Lisa leaned in, her tone serious. Do you believe this case could lead to meaningful change? I do, Jamal said firmly. But only if we keep the pressure on. This isn't just about one bad officer. It's about creating a system where everyone is treated equally under the law. Extreme event, an anonymous tip. Later that evening, as Jamal and Nicole were reviewing their strategy, Jamal's phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, Urgent, evidence against Officer Daniels. Jamal opened the email, his eyes narrowing as he read the message. I'm an officer in the department. I've seen Daniels' body cam footage from your arrest. You need to get it before they destroy it. It proves he targeted you without cause. Attached to the email was a short clip from the body cam. In the video, Daniels could be heard before approaching Jamal. Let's get this guy. He fits the description. The clip ended abruptly, but it was enough. Jamal's heart raced. This was the smoking gun he needed. Nicole leaned over, her eyes widening as she watched the clip. This is it, Jamal. This proves everything. Jamal nodded, his mind already racing with next steps. We need to act fast before they try to cover this up. Captain Reynolds leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Internal Affairs is going to tear you apart when they see this. You've put the entire department at risk, Daniels. Now tell me, why did you target Washington? Daniels hesitated, his gaze darting toward the floor. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by a flicker of fear. I thought he was a threat, he muttered. Reynolds' voice was ice cold. A threat? He was sitting in a cafe, Daniels. Dressed in a suit, minding his own business. You can't weasel your way out of this. The footage speaks for itself. Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but Reynolds cut him off. I'm giving you one chance to cooperate. If you don't, I'll hand this over to IA myself, and you'll face the full consequences. Daniels stiffened. What do you want me to do? Sit tight and don't make things worse. And pray the department can survive this mess, Reynolds said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Now get out of my office. Daniels left, his face pale, and Reynolds leaned back in his chair, letting out a heavy sigh. He knew this was only the beginning. Meanwhile, at Jamal's office, Nicole paced the room as Jamal reviewed the clip again, analyzing every second. Do you think Reynolds will cooperate? She asked. He doesn't have a choice, Jamal replied. The footage is too damning. If he tries to cover it up, he'll be just as guilty as Daniels. Nicole nodded, but her worry was evident. We're dealing with a corrupt system. They'll do everything they can to protect themselves. Jamal leaned back, his expression resolute. Which is why we're going to outmaneuver them. Just then, Jamal's phone buzzed. It was a text from Captain Reynolds. Meet me at the station in 1 hour. We'll talk. Jamal showed the message to Nicole. Looks like the captain is ready to play ball. Nicole crossed her arms. Be careful. This could be a trap. Jamal nodded. I'll be ready. 1 hour later. Jamal walked into the police station, his every step measured. The officers at the front desk watched him with wary eyes, but no one stopped him. Captain Reynolds was waiting for him in a conference room. He gestured for Jamal to sit, then closed the door behind them. I've reviewed the footage, Reynolds began. You're right. Daniels acted improperly. I'm prepared to release the body cam footage, but I need assurances. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Assurances. Reynolds leaned forward, lowering his voice. The department is already under fire. If this footage goes public, it could destroy us. I need your word that you'll work with us to handle this responsibly. Jamal's expression hardened. Responsibly? Your officer illegally detained and assaulted me. And now you want to control the narrative. Reynolds held up a hand. I'm not trying to excuse Daniel's actions, but we need to balance accountability with preserving public trust. If this spirals out of control, the fallout could be catastrophic. Jamal considered his words carefully. I'll agree to collaborate on one condition: complete transparency. The public deserves the truth, and Daniels needs to face the consequences. Reynolds nodded slowly. Agreed. He slid a USB drive across the table. Here's the full footage. Do what you need to do. Jamal picked up the drive, his heart pounding. This was the evidence he needed to bring Daniels to justice. As he stood to leave, Reynolds spoke again. Washington, I'm sorry this happened, and I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't happen again. Jamal paused, then gave a curt nod. We'll see. Extreme event. The footage goes live. That night, Jamal and Nicole uploaded the full body cam footage to a secure cloud server. Then, with Nicole's PR expertise, they crafted a powerful public statement and sent it to major news outlets. By morning, the footage was everywhere. News anchors dissected every second, social media exploded with outrage, and protesters gathered outside the police station, demanding justice. Daniel's name trended nationwide, his actions condemned by people from all walks of life. The pressure on the department intensified, and Internal Affairs launched a formal investigation. But as Jamal watched the chaos unfold on TV, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was another anonymous tip. You've only scratched the surface. There's more you need to see. Jamal's pulse quickened as he read the message. The fight was far from over. Jamal's eyes locked on the new message, his heart pounding. There's more you need to see. Nicole leaned over his shoulder, reading the text. Another tip? Jamal nodded, his mind racing. This could mean there's more evidence, maybe even a larger pattern of misconduct. The message contained a link to an encrypted folder. Jamal hesitated for a moment, then clicked on it. After entering the decryption key provided in the message, the folder opened to reveal dozens of files, reports, videos, and internal memos. Nicole's eyes widened. What is all this? Jamal scrolled through the documents. It looks like a collection of complaints and incidents involving Daniels and other officers. Some of these go back years. One file caught his attention: complaint, Daniels Incident 2019. He opened it, revealing a detailed report of a traffic stop where Daniels had used excessive force on another black man. The victim had filed a formal complaint, but the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Jamal clenched his jaw. This isn't just about me. Daniels has a history of targeting people. Nicole pointed to another file labeled Internal Memo, IA Warning. Look at this, she said. Jamal opened the memo, which was from Internal Affairs, dated 2 years ago. It warned the department about Daniels' behavior and recommended disciplinary action. However, the response from the higher-ups was to issue a mere written warning, citing his exemplary service record. Nicole shook her head in disbelief. They knew he was a problem and did nothing. Jamal exhaled deeply. This changes everything. It's not just about holding Daniels accountable. It's about exposing a system that protects bad cops. At the station. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the police station was tense. Officers whispered among themselves, their eyes darting toward Daniels, who sat alone at his desk, looking more rattled than ever. Captain Reynolds called an emergency meeting. Once the officers were gathered, he addressed them, his tone grave. As you all know, the footage of Daniels' arrest of Jamal Washington has gone public, Reynolds began. The backlash is severe, and now new evidence has surfaced. He paused, letting his words sink in. Internal Affairs has reopened multiple cases involving Officer Daniels. I want to make one thing clear. This department will cooperate fully. There will be no cover-ups, no excuses. Daniels stood abruptly. Captain, with all due respect, this is a witch hunt. I've done my job by the book. Reynolds shot him a cold glare. Sit down, Daniels. You've had your chance to explain yourself. Daniels hesitated, then sank back into his seat, his face flushed with anger and fear. Reynolds continued, We're not just dealing with public outrage. We're dealing with the truth. If any of you have relevant information, now is the time to come forward. The room fell silent. The weight of the situation was clear. Jamal takes action. Armed with the new evidence, Jamal prepared to escalate his case. He contacted his legal team, instructing them to file an amended complaint that included the newly discovered reports. We're not just suing Daniels, Jamal told his team during a video call. We're suing the entire department for systemic misconduct. One of his lawyers, a sharp-witted woman named Clara, nodded. This will turn the heat up even more. Are you ready for the backlash? Jamal's expression hardened. They've been covering for him for years. It's time for accountability. Nicole chimed in, her voice firm. And we'll make sure the public stays informed every step of the way. This isn't just a legal battle. It's a fight for justice. Clara smiled. I like your style. Let's make it happen. Extreme event, a mysterious warning. Later that night, as Jamal and Nicole were winding down, Jamal's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Washington, a deep voice said on the other end. You're digging into dangerous territory. Jamal's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? That's not important, the voice replied. What's important is that you stop what you're doing. For your own safety. Nicole, sensing something was wrong, leaned closer to listen. Jamal's voice was calm but firm. I don't respond well to threats. This isn't a threat, Mr. Washington. It's a warning, the voice said. Walk away before it's too late. The line went dead. Nicole's eyes were wide with concern. Who was that? Jamal set the phone down, his mind racing. I don't know. But whoever it was, they're scared. That means we're getting close to something big. He looked at Nicole, his determination unwavering. We're not stopping. Not now. The morning after the mysterious phone call, Jamal sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the files from the encrypted folder. His focus was sharp, but the warning from the previous night lingered in his mind. Nicole entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of him and sat down. We need to talk about that call, she said, her tone serious. Jamal nodded, not looking up from his laptop. I know. Nicole leaned forward, her voice lowering. This isn't just about a lawsuit anymore, Jamal. Someone out there doesn't want the truth to come out. We need to be careful. Jamal finally met her gaze. I've dealt with intimidation tactics before. This time won't be any different. Nicole frowned. You've never had someone warn you off like that. What if they try something more than a phone call? Jamal set his coffee down, his expression hardening. Then we'll be ready. Before Nicole could respond, Jamal's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, another unknown number. Here we go, he muttered, answering the call. Who is this? There was a brief pause, then the same deep voice from the night before spoke. You didn't listen to my warning. Jamal's grip tightened on the phone. No, I didn't. And I'm not backing down. The voice chuckled, low and menacing. You're brave. But bravery has its limits. You'll regret this. Jamal's jaw clenched. If you think a few veiled threats will stop me, you don't know who you're dealing with. The voice paused, then said, Consider this your final warning. The line went dead. Nicole watched him closely, her concern deepening. What now? Jamal exhaled, his mind racing. Now we call in some reinforcements. Reinforcements arrive. Jamal contacted his friend Marcus, a former police officer turned private investigator. Within an hour, Marcus was at their house, ready to help. This sounds serious, Marcus said, after Jamal and Nicole explained the situation. Whoever's behind this isn't just trying to scare you. They're trying to shut you down. Jamal nodded. That's why we need to find out who's pulling the strings. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering their options. First, we need to trace those calls. If they're using burner phones, it won't be easy, but it's a start. Nicole chimed in. And what about the encrypted folder? Could the files in there point us in the right direction? Marcus nodded. Absolutely. I'll take a closer look. There might be names, timestamps, or other details that can help us connect the dots. Jamal leaned forward, his determination growing. Good. Let's get to work. At the station. Meanwhile, tension at the police station continued to rise. Internal Affairs had begun questioning officers, and the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Daniel sat in a dimly lit office, his hands clenched into fists. His once confident demeanor was now replaced with visible anxiety. His partner, Harris, entered the room, closing the door behind him. They're closing in on you, Daniels, Harris said quietly. IA is digging through everything. It's only a matter of time before they find something. Daniels glared at him. I didn't do anything wrong. Harris raised an eyebrow. Come on, man. We both know that's not true. Daniels stood abruptly, pacing the room. They're trying to make an example out of me. But I'm not going down without a fight. Harris sighed. You might want to think about cutting a deal before it's too late. Daniels stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. I'm not a snitch. Harris shook his head. Suit yourself. Just know that when the ship goes down, you'll be the first to sink. Extreme event, the break-in. That night, as Jamal and Nicole were preparing for bed, Marcus was still in Jamal's office, combing through the encrypted files. The house was quiet, save for the occasional click of a keyboard. Suddenly, Marcus heard a faint noise outside, a rustling sound, followed by the creak of the back gate. His instincts kicked in. He quickly turned off the laptop screen and moved toward the window, peeking out. Two shadowy figures were approaching the house, their movements deliberate and cautious. Marcus grabbed his phone and called Jamal. Jamal, he whispered. We've got company. Jamal, already half asleep, bolted upright. What? Who? Don't know yet, Marcus said. But they're coming in through the back. Jamal was out of bed in seconds, signaling Nicole to stay put. He grabbed a bat from the closet and headed toward his office. Marcus met him at the door, a tense look on his face. They're trying to break in. We need to act fast. Before Jamal could respond, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the house. Nicole appeared in the hallway, fear in her eyes. What's going on? Stay back, Jamal said firmly. The intruders were inside now, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Marcus and Jamal positioned themselves near the doorway, ready to confront whoever had invaded their home. The tension was palpable, every second stretching like an eternity. Then, the door swung open. The door swung open, and two masked intruders stepped into Jamal's office. One of them held a crowbar, the other a flashlight, their faces partially obscured by ski masks. They froze momentarily, realizing they weren't alone. Jamal gripped the bat tightly, his heart pounding. Marcus, standing slightly behind him, raised a hand to signal calm. Stop right there, Marcus said, his voice low and authoritative. The intruders exchanged a quick glance before the one with the crowbar lunged forward. Jamal swung the bat, narrowly missing the attacker, who stumbled back. Leave now, Jamal shouted, his voice echoing through the house. The second intruder moved toward Marcus, who stepped forward with surprising agility. In one swift motion, Marcus disarmed the man of his flashlight and pushed him against the wall. You don't want this fight, Marcus growled. Trust me. The first intruder regained his footing, but before he could strike again, Nicole appeared in the hallway holding her phone. The police are on their way, she yelled. The intruders hesitated, clearly reevaluating their options. They weren't expecting this level of resistance, or the impending arrival of law enforcement. The sound of distant sirens grew louder, confirming Nicole's claim. The intruders exchanged another glance, then bolted toward the back door. Marcus made a move to pursue, but Jamal grabbed his arm. Let them go, Jamal said, breathing heavily. We've got what we need. Marcus nodded, watching as the intruders disappeared into the night. The aftermath. Minutes later, two police cruisers pulled up to the house, their lights flashing. Officers quickly secured the area and took statements from Jamal, Nicole, and Marcus. One officer, a young woman with a professional demeanor, approached Jamal. Do you have any idea who might want to break into your home? Jamal nodded grimly. I'm involved in a high-profile lawsuit against the police department. This wasn't a random break-in. The officer's expression darkened. We'll launch a full investigation. Do you have any security footage? Nicole gestured to the corner of the room. We've got cameras around the house. Everything should be recorded. The officer nodded. Good. That'll help. We'll take the footage and analyze it for leads. As the officers worked, Captain Reynolds arrived, his face a mix of concern and frustration. Washington, he said, approaching Jamal. I just heard. Are you and your family okay? We're fine, Captain, Jamal replied. But this proves what I've been saying. Someone inside the department doesn't want this case to go forward. Reynolds nodded, his jaw tight. I've already got internal affairs on high alert. If any of my officers are involved, I'll make sure they face the consequences. Jamal's eyes narrowed. I hope you mean that, Captain. Because this isn't just about me anymore. It's about rooting out corruption, no matter how deep it goes. Reynolds met his gaze, the weight of the situation evident. You have my word. Piecing it together. After the police left, Jamal, Nicole, and Marcus gathered in the living room, the adrenaline still pumping through their veins. Marcus reviewed the footage from the break-in on his laptop. The intruders' faces were mostly obscured, but a distinctive tattoo on the arm of one of them caught his attention. Gotcha, Marcus muttered, pausing the video and zooming in on the tattoo. It was a symbol he recognized, a mark often associated with a local gang, known to have ties with corrupt cops. He turned the laptop toward Jamal. This could be our connection. These guys weren't just random criminals. They were sent by someone. Jamal studied the image, his mind racing. If we can identify them, we might be able to trace them back to whoever's behind this. Nicole leaned in. What's our next move? Marcus closed the laptop. I'll dig into the gang's activity and see if I can link them to anyone in the department. Meanwhile, you need to keep the pressure on with your lawsuit. The more public this gets, the harder it'll be for them to hide. Jamal nodded. Agreed. We're not letting them intimidate us. Extreme event, a direct message. The following morning, as Jamal prepared to leave for a scheduled press conference, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. You've been warned. Drop the case, or next time we won't miss. Jamal stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He showed it to Nicole and Marcus. They're escalating, Nicole said, her voice filled with concern. Marcus's expression hardened. They're getting desperate. That means we're closing in. Jamal's resolve only strengthened. Let them come. We've got the truth on our side. But even as he spoke, he knew the stakes had just been raised. Jamal stood at the podium, his face resolute as the crowd of reporters gathered before him. Cameras flashed, and the hum of murmured conversations filled the air. Behind him, Nicole and Marcus stood as pillars of support. This was the moment he had been building toward, a public stand against corruption and injustice. Thank you all for coming, Jamal began, his voice calm but commanding. Over the past few weeks, my family and I have been subjected to intimidation, harassment, and even a violent break-in. All because we dared to expose the truth about misconduct within our city's police department. He paused, letting his words sink in. The reporters leaned in, their pens poised and cameras rolling. But let me be clear, we will not back down. Today, I'm releasing additional evidence that not only implicates Officer Daniels, but also reveals a systemic problem that has plagued this department for years. Jamal held up a USB drive. This contains internal memos, complaints, and body cam footage that show a consistent pattern of racial profiling and abuse of power. It's time for accountability. The crowd erupted in questions, but Jamal raised a hand. All questions will be answered in due time. For now, the truth speaks for itself. He stepped away from the podium, his message delivered. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. At the station, the collapse. Back at the police station, chaos reigned. The press conference had been broadcast live, and the evidence Jamal released was now public knowledge. Officers whispered in hushed tones, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Daniels sat in an interrogation room, his hands clasped tightly. Across from him, two internal affairs investigators reviewed the damning footage and documents. You've got a lot to answer for, Daniels, one of them said, his voice cold. The evidence is overwhelming. Targeting civilians, falsifying reports, excessive force. It's all here. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. I was just doing my job, he muttered. The investigator leaned forward. Your job. Your actions have tarnished this department's reputation. Do you have any idea how many lives you've ruined? Daniels' bravado crumbled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. The investigator didn't let up. It's too late for excuses. You're facing criminal charges, and you're not the only one. The higher-ups who protected you will be held accountable too. Daniels slumped in his chair, defeated. His career was over, and he knew it. The turning point. Meanwhile, Captain Reynolds addressed his officers in a tense briefing. The department is under intense scrutiny. This isn't just about one officer. It's about restoring trust in our community. He locked eyes with his team. If any of you have information about misconduct, now is the time to come forward. We can't afford to hide anything. A few officers exchanged nervous glances. Slowly, one of them stood. Captain, there's something you should know. As the officer spoke, the room fell silent. Bit by bit, the truth began to unravel, revealing the extent of the corruption. Jamal's final move. Later that evening, Jamal sat in his office, reviewing the day's events. His phone buzzed with messages of support from community leaders, activists, and even former clients. Nicole walked in, a proud smile on her face. You did it, Jamal. The truth is out. Jamal nodded, but his expression remained serious. This is just the beginning. We've won a battle, but the war for justice continues. Marcus joined them, holding a folder. You've set a precedent, Jamal. This case will inspire others to stand up and demand accountability. Jamal leaned back, a a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. But just as he was about to relax, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unexpected number. "Mr. Washington," the voice on the other end said. "This is the Attorney General. We'd like to discuss how we can work together to implement meaningful reform." Jamal's eyes widened. "I'd be honored." As the call ended, he turned to Nicole and Marcus. "Looks like we're taking this fight to the next level." Nicole smiled. "And we're with you every step of the way." The fight for justice had only just begun, but Jamal knew one thing for certain. They were finally on the right path. The end.